Hey Vineyard, this lecture is called Write Like a Professional. And in this lecture, I'm going to be giving you six writing strategies that I think will dramatically improve your personal narrative essay. Now, you do have a corresponding guided notes assignment that I've pumped out to Google Classroom. And you definitely should be taking notes in the blanks as you watch this video. You will definitely have to pause this video to fill in the blank questions as you go. So I just want you to keep that in mind. If you wanted to print out that guided note sheet and then write out your notes by hand and then send me a photo of those notes, that would probably be easier than switching between tabs. But in this online setting, when I need you to take notes on a lecture, I have to pump them out in a Google Doc. There's no other way. So if you do have a printer, I highly recommend you take the notes by hand, but otherwise, open up that Google Doc in a new tab and switch back and forth, taking notes on the lecture and pausing it as needed. Okay, so this is how you write like a professional. So there are six simple tips or strategies that are immediately going to improve your writing. Those six strategies are participles, absolutes, appositives, adjectives shifted out of order, vivid verbs, and similes and metaphors. If you can include these six tools in your rhetorical tool belt, if you can include these six tools in your writing, then you will turn into a wonderful writer, a professional writer even. So the first tool we're going to look at is participles. Participles are ing verbs or ed verbs placed at the beginning of a sentence. So a phrase that begins with an ing or ed verb at the beginning of a sentence. Let's look at a couple of examples. So here's a sentence without participles, and then here's a sentence with participles. The diamond-scaled snakes attack their prey. It's kind of a boring sentence. There's not much description. We don't really have an image in our mind when we read that sentence. But if you add in participles, ing verbs, before the sentence or before that frame, then the sentence suddenly comes alive. So hissing and slithering, the diamond-scaled snakes attack their prey. Hissing and slithering are both ing verbs, participles. And now I actually have this mental image of this snake coiled and ready to attack its prey. Here are some examples of participles from literature. This is from Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, a classic novel that is absolutely rhetorically beautiful. It is written so well, and part of that is because of his implementation of participles, these ing and ed verbs. So let's look at some of the participles that he uses in Old Man and the Sea. Shifting the weight of the line to his left shoulder and kneeling carefully, he washed his hand in the ocean and held it there, submerged for more than a minute, watching the blood trail away and the steady movement of the water against his hand as the boat moved. It's a gorgeous sentence, and it comes alive because of Hemingway's implementation of participles. So let's look at them. Shifting is an ing verb. Kneeling is another ing verb. Submerged is an ed verb. And then watching is another ing verb. These verbs, these words, are what make this sentence come alive. They give the sentence an image in the reader's mind's eye. You might want to pause the video here and fill in sections C and D of your Google Doc where you come up with your own sentences. Okay, so the next rule that I want to introduce you to is absolutes. So absolutes are a two-word combination, a noun and an ing or ed verb added onto a sentence, or such a combination used to launch a phrase. Now I know that's a very confusing definition, but I want you to think of absolutes as a two-word phrase that involves a participle, which we just learned what those are, and they're usually added onto a sentence, usually at the beginning. So let's look at some examples. So here's a sentence without an absolute. The cat climbed the tree. Now I add in an absolute, feet kicking, the cat climbed the tree. So feet kicking is the two-word participle phrase that gives this sentence life. Now I actually see the cat climbing up the tree. We can make this even better if we give it more description. Feet kicking on the slick birch branch, the cat climbed the tree. Now we actually see those paws struggling as the cat goes up the tree. And it's all because we added in an absolute phrase, this two-word combination featuring an ing verb, a participle. Here's an example from literature. This is from Anne Rice's The Mummy. The mummy was moving, torn wrappings hanging from its arm. The mummy stepped out of its gilded box. A scream froze in Carla's throat. Again, torn wrappings is that absolute. It's that ing verb in a two-word combination. Before moving on to appositives, you should probably stop the video and fill out sections C and D for number 2. Okay, now on to appositives. Appositives also have a sort of confusing definition. Appositives are defined as a noun that adds a second image to a preceding noun, or that second noun image is turned into a phrase. That's really confusing, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you look at the examples. So here's a really basic sentence. The raccoon enjoys eating turtle eggs. Now, if we add a noun phrase onto that, if we add an appositive onto that, the sentence suddenly comes much more alive. The raccoon, a scavenger, enjoys eating turtle eggs. So in this sentence, the appositive is this noun phrase, this descriptor, a scavenger. But we can make the sentence even better if we make the appositive more detailed. So the raccoon, a midnight scavenger who roams lake shorelines in a quest to fill its belly, enjoys eating turtle eggs, is a much better sentence because we have the noun is the raccoon, and now we have the appositive that follows it. The raccoon is a midnight scavenger who roams lake shorelines in a quest to fill its belly. Now all of a sudden that boring raccoon in this original sentence is a much more interesting character because it's a midnight scavenger who steals eggs. So again, appositives are another rule that really make your sentences come alive. Here's another classic example from literature. This is from Stephen King. Dave, my older brother, inventor of the super duper electromagnet, decided I should test his invention. So again, Dave is the noun in this sentence, and then the appositive, the noun phrase, is this description of that noun. So Dave is his older brother, an inventor of the super duper electromagnet. That noun phrase is what gives Dave character. It's what makes that character come alive. So again, before you move on to the next section, make sure you fill out C and D in your notes for your Google Doc. So the next rule I want to talk about is adjectives placed out of order. It's a really simple rule, and it's probably the least complicated in terms of implementing in your writing, but it really makes your sentences stronger. So let's take a look at what happens when we place our adjectives out of order. All I want you to do when you place your adjectives out of order is instead of stringing 3 adjectives in a row, place 1 before the noun and then 2 after the noun. Let's take a look. Here's a pretty boring sentence. The large, red-eyed, angry bull charged the matador. But if I take those same adjectives, large, red-eyed, and angry, and I shift the order around the noun, the sentence comes alive and it sounds much stronger. The large bull, red-eyed and angry, changed the matador. I've taken the exact same adjectives from the first sentence and I've placed 1 in front of the bull and 2 after. 1 in front of the noun and 2 after the noun. And now the sentence is much more beautiful. So here's an example or a couple of examples of adjectives shifted out of order from literature. The pavilion was a simple city, long and rectangular. That's from Caleb Carr in The Alienist. He could have written, the pavilion was a long and rectangular city, but in shifting those adjectives out of order, the sentence becomes much more beautiful. Okay, second sentence. I could smell mama, crisp and starched, plumping my pillow, and the cool muslin pillowcase touched both my ears as the back of my head sank into all those feathers. This is from Robert Newton Peck, a book called A Day No Pigs Would Die. And you see here that crisp and starched are the adjectives shifted out of order in this sentence. Those are adjectives used to describe mama, which is placed earlier in the sentence. And again, those adjectives shifted out of order make the sentence more complex, make it more poetic, make it more beautiful. Before moving on to vivid verbs, make sure you pause the video and fill out sections C and D for that rule. Okay, the next rule is vivid verbs. Vivid verbs are verbs that give your sentence or your paragraph life, meaning. So what I want you to do is I want you to avoid non-vivid verbs or to be verbs. And if you can energize your writing with vivid verbs, your sentences will be far more lively. So let's take a look. Here's a sentence without any vivid verbs. The gravel road was on the left side of the barn. Was is actually that to be verb. If we can avoid those kind of verbs entirely, our sentences will get much stronger. So let's take this sentence without a vivid verb and make it stronger. The gravel road curled around the left side of the barn. All I've done is replace a to be verb, a passive verb, with an active verb, a vivid verb. Was has been replaced with curled. And that single word replacement does wonders for the sentence. It makes the sentence so much stronger. The gravel road curled around the left side of the barn. Now we actually see what the road does to the barn. It curls around it instead of just saying that it was on the left side. Here's an example from literature. This is from John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled his fingers so the water arose in little splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. These are all vivid verbs. Dabbled, wiggled, arose, widened. And they give this sentence life. We now see Lenny at the edge of the water putting his hands into the water, and we see the water rippling as a result of it. It's because of the vivid verbs that this sentence comes alive. John Steinbeck doesn't use passive language in his writing because it makes his sentences weaker. He uses vivid verbs. Okay, before moving on to your final rule, make sure you pause the video and fill out sections C and D of your guided notes for vivid verbs. All right. Our final strategies for wonderful sentences are similes and metaphors. So similes and metaphors both compare two dissimilar things for the sake of creating an image in the reader's mind. But similes do this using like or as. They have to feature like or as in the sentence, while metaphors create this comparison without any of this connective wording, without this specific connective wording. So both similes and metaphors compare two unlike things, but similes always use like or as to compare those two unlike things. So here's an example of a simile. First, a boring sentence. The wind cut through my scarf and froze my neck. Now let's add in a simile using like or as. The wind, as icy as a witch's curse, cut through my scarf and froze my neck. Again, the wind here has been compared to a witch's curse using like or as, and now the sentence has much more life. Here's an example from literature. A pure white mist crept over the water like breath upon a mirror. This is from A.J. Cronin. So the white mist here is being compared to breath on a mirror and how it fogs a mirror up. It's a beautiful comparison, and now we exactly see what that mist looked like. If we were to use it in a metaphor, if we were to use a metaphor in a sentence, we're creating a comparison, but we're not using like or as. So Pat Benatar writes, love is a battlefield. Again, she's comparing love to war, meaning you're going to get hurt in love. It's a wonderful metaphor. It's simple, and it absolutely works to describe the conundrum that hopefully we'll all find ourselves in one day. All right, so make sure you fill out C and D for this final section on similes and metaphors. Otherwise, your lecture should be done. I know this was a really info-packed one, and you'll probably have to do a lot of pausing and writing during this lecture. But I hope that you can use these strategies when you start writing your personal narrative. If you can use these 6 tools, your narrative is going to be beautiful. It's going to sound professional. All right, have a lovely day. I'll see you soon.